Dear learners, Namaskar. I am Dr. Amiteshwar Ratra, Associate Professor at STRIDE, IGNOU. Now, we will discuss Cognitive Theory Part 2. This is part of your MDE 412 course. In this session, we will focus on Bruner's theory of instruction and David Ausubel's theory of learning. And also, we will discuss applications of cognitive theory on instruction design. Now let us begin with Bruner's theory of instruction. In the previous sections, you have studied about Jean Piaget. Now we will discuss Jerome S. Bruner. Bruner defined learning as the process in which learner receives the instruction and work independently without support of a teacher. According to Bruner, instruction should take into account the nature of students as knowers, the nature of knowledge, and the nature of the process of getting knowledge. According to Bruner, there is modes of representation. So, Jerome Seymour Bruner, who was an American psychologist, contributed to cognitive psychology and cognitive learning theory in educational psychology. Bruner theorized that learners go through three major stages of intellectual development, and these are an active stage in which the learners learn about the world around them by acting object. In a sense, an object is what you can do with it. A glass is used to drink while a chair is to sit on it. Then the next stage is iconic stage. Here the learners progress from an active stage to iconic stage where the experiences and objects are represented as concrete images. The learner no longer needs to manipulate objects in order to learn about them, but can learn through models, demonstrations, and pictures. The next stage, that is the final stage the learners goes through, is the symbolic stage, when they develop the capacity to think abstractly with symbols. In this stage, individuals go beyond the present and concrete experience to create hypotheses. Now, Bruner also realized that the instruction for the learner should also be sequenced. In other words, for learning to occur best, a learner should first experience it, then react to it concretely, and finally symbolize it. Rather than neatly delineated stages, the modes of representation are integrated and loosely sequential as they translate into each other. Symbolic representation remains the ultimate mode, for it is clearly the most mysterious of the three stages. Now, Bruner's theory suggests it is efficacious when faced with the new material to follow a progression from inactive to iconic to symbolic representation. This holds true even for our adult learners. Bruner's work also suggests that a learner, even of a very young age, is capable of learning any study material so long as the instruction is organized appropriately. That means it is from an active stage to iconic stage to symbolic stage. Now, Bruner suggests a system of coding in which people from hierarchical arrangement of related categories can work together. Each successively higher level of category becomes more specific, echoing understanding of knowledge acquisition. In accordance with this understanding of learning, Bruner proposed the spiral curriculum in which each subject or skill area is revised at intervals at more sophisticated level each time. Now it can be the process of learning. To Bruner, what is important is not the memorization of facts, but the process of acquiring knowledge. The process of stating a problem, selecting data sources, gathering data, processing data, and making inferences are more important than whether or not students learn a set of facts. Instead of presenting students with conclusions, the distance teacher, instructional designer, open and distance learning specialist should structure the learning situation so that students learn how to work with data to make inferences. That is, they should learn the procedures or methods of inquiry. So now, according to Bruner, learning is a matter of rearrangement or transforming evidence. It is a type of thinking in which the students goes beyond the information given to gain new insights and generalizations. So the next point stated by Bruner would be the formation of learning structures. Now Bruner lists 4 advantages of emphasizing structure in designing instruction. And these are: understanding the fundamental structure of a subject makes it more comprehensible. We understand the material better if it is logically organized. A structure permits the student to narrow the gap between elementary and advanced knowledge if given the appropriate learning experiences. Every distance learner can understand some of the basic concepts in a subject area. The next point is that unless detail is organized into structured patterns, it is rapidly forgotten. We remember the study material better, can actually remember from those study material which we are able to retrieve the study material from our own memory when it is logically organized study material. Also, we need to have an understanding of the fundamental principles and ideas which facilitates adequate transfer of information from one concept to the other. Now comes the stage of concept formation. The inductive process of learning play a role in the formation of learning structures, which consist of concepts and coding systems. Bruner assumes that a student's interaction with the world always involves categorization or conceptualization. The formation of concepts takes place by identifying similar properties in the objects. Categorization permits the recognition of objects because it is only through the use of concepts that any object can be identified and communicated. Concepts are then organized into coding systems. Coding systems is a structure of concepts that ranges from the very basic to the generic concept. Generic concepts include more specific concepts. The coding system may include concepts at several levels of generality, each becoming more inclusive as they become generic and less defined in nature. The formation of coding systems for human thought processes is important because the role they play in retention of information, transfer of learning, and the inquiry process is through the codings that have been taken place in one's human thought processes. The next is discovery learning. The emphasis on mastering an inductive process of discovering knowledge, understanding the fundamental cognitive structures of a subject using intuitive as well as analytical reasoning and underlying upon intrinsic motivation is encapsulated in a teaching method where Bruner calls this as discovery learning. Now, discovery learning takes place when the students rearrange or transform evidence in such a way that go beyond the reassembled evidence to additional new insights. Using this method, the teacher, instructional designer, or open and distance education learning specialist present a set of problems to students who then explore them for solutions and for rules that would allow the solutions of other similar problems. The teacher, instructional designer, the open and distance learning expert, the learning specialist guides the students through an inductive inquiry process similar to the process used by the specialist who originally discovered the concepts and the theories in the specific subject area. As a result, students group and reorganize the material being studied. They discover the relationship that exists among the concepts and organize them into coding. Now let us discuss the applications of Bruner's theory for especially applicable in distance learning. So we would say that applications is applicable for teachers as well as for our distance students. So when we say it is for teachers, we will say it redefines the teaching role as facilitator rather than only the transmitter of knowledge. When we think about our students, then we can say that students are actively learning and gaining learning experiences. The next point is, for teachers, distance teachers, it stimulates learning and inquiry by setting challenging problems for students to solve. Why? For students, we can ask questions while investigating, like how, why, different from so and so. Now, we also provide resource-rich learning environment to the teacher. We also provide opportunities for students to interact with the material actively, iconically, and symbolically. We also allow for individual differences in ability, interest, and prior knowledge and experience to be present. So we also, when we are looking, this is from the teacher's point of view, when we are looking from the student's point of view, students are motivated to observe directly, draw diagrams and pictures, record the observations, and describe from one's own experiences. For teachers, they monitor the quality of learning taking place in terms of students' ability, interest, and experience. And for students, we will say infer and generalize from their experiences the knowledge being gained. Over here, then we, for the teachers, has to revisit the material of increasingly higher levels of abstraction, and the students have to also to revisit the material and the concepts and redesign investigations based upon what is needed by them, verify that all the inquiries and hypotheses are answered through the student's own discovery learning method. So now let us come over to the next theorist for today's session, who is David Ausubel. So we will now discuss David Ausubel's theory of learning. David Ausubel was a cognitive psychologist who is credited with the learning theory of advanced organizers. Now his theory, like Gagner's, suggests how teachers, instructional designers can best arrange the conditions that facilitate learning for students. Now, the overarching idea in Ausubel's theory is that knowledge is hierarchically organized, that new information is meaningful, the extent to which it can be related, attached, or anchored is to what is already known. Now, according to Ausubel, there are proposed advanced organizers through which meaningful learning can occur, and Ausubel had placed few types of subsumptions. There were three, which are: one, the subsumption theory. A primary process in learning is subsumption, to which new material is related to relevant ideas in the existing cognitive structure on a substantive, non-verbatim basis. Cognitive structures represent the residue of all learning experiences. Forgetting occurs because certain details get integrated and lose their individual identity. The next subsumption, according to Ausubel, is derivative subsumption. This refers to learning that occurs when a child builds upon concepts already mastered. For example, if learners are learning about apples, they will compare characteristics of red and green apples, small and large apples, sour and sweet apples, and so on, and build on an overall concept of what apples are and what can they do with them. So this is derivative subsumption. Now we come over to the correlative subsumption. Here the concepts are extended. For example, learners learn about apples, bananas, mangoes. In each case, comparisons are made and concepts extended. For example, learners learn that some skins of fruits can be eaten while others have to be thrown away. So, and some can be used in compost heap for obtaining manure later. and some are good for some kinds of plants and some are good for other kinds of plants. So subsumptions reinforce an underlying principle of effective learning, which is to start with familiar material and extend it. For this, general principles are often given, which are then tested through examples. Now, the next subsumption is obliterative subsumption. This refers to the distinguishing ability of the material to be learned. Now, if we want the study material to be remembered, it must have distinguished characteristics. Otherwise, it will be forgotten. For example, it would be important to point out why some apples are best used for eating raw and while some can be used for making apple pie by cooking. So in other words, similarities and differences should be highlighted to understand a given concept better. So now we come over to meaningful reception learning. Now, according to Ausubel, in meaningful reception learning, the material is to be learned, is presented to the learners in a relatively complete and organized form. The learners are expected to discover much of the study material themselves and to organize it in their own way. Now, Ausubel stresses meaningful learning as opposed to rote learning or memorization and reception or received knowledge. Rather, then discovery learning. Ausubel maintains that learning is through reception and discovery learning is inefficient and not necessary in most circumstances. According to Ausubel, the focus of attention should be on how to make reception learning most effective. Now, to help learners learn verbal material, Ausubel recommends that he calls reception learning, in which material is organized from top down, that is from the most inclusive to the most specific. Ausubel also advocates the use of advanced organizers. An organizer is a set of ideas or concepts that is given to the learner before the material is to be learned. Now, it is meant to provide the stable cognitive structure to which new learning can be anchored. Organizers can also be used to facilitate the recall of the facts. Now, advanced organizer entails the use of introductory materials with a high level of generality that introduce new material and facilitate learning by providing an anchoring idea to which the new idea can be attached. Cognitive theorists believe that it is essential to relate the new knowledge to the existing information learned. Distance teachers, instructional designers, learning experts, learning specialists can facilitate learning by organizing information presented so that new concepts are easily relatable to the concepts already learned. Now, for examples of devices that can be used are like pictures, titles of stories, reviews of previously learned concepts, short video segments, a paradigm, grammar rules, etc. Now we next come to the progressive differentiation. According to Ausubel, the purpose of progressive differentiation is to increase the stability and clarity of anchoring ideas. The basic idea here is that if you are presenting three related topics, say A, B and C, then rather than presenting all the topics of A, then going to B, you should make a spiral approach. You should be able to relate A and B and C and help the learner to understand the material better. That is, when you go through the study material, you would teach the big ideas, that is, those of the highest in the hierarchy in all the three topics, and then on successive steps you would begin to elaborate the details. Along the way, you would point out principles that the three topics had in common, things that differentiated them up from each other. Now we come over next to the implications of instructional design according to Ausubel. Now, Ausubel had related to based his instructional events on the meaningful reception learning. So according to Ausubel, logically organize the study material, link the material to what learners already know, relate the study material directly to learners' existing concepts, Use effective expository teaching methods, in particular explanation, narration, and demonstration. Present advanced organizers to the learner before the study material is to be learned, is presented. Then the study material is to be learned in a variety of contexts. Review the study material presented, learned, and provide effective feedback. Apply acquired learning in novel situations to demonstrate transferability. Now with this, we come to the implications of cognitive theories on this instructional design. We have read and heard and we know it with experience that the main concern of the cognitivists was the learner and the learning process. The cognitive processes that need to be developed through providing different learning tasks are given due importance. In order to design instruction that will support learning, it is essential that we understand the nature of the tasks that learners will be performing. The cognitive task analysis and the learner analysis for designing instruction are described in the cognitive task analysis and the learner analysis for designing instruction now are, let us discuss that. It is the cognitive task analysis. Now the cognitive task analysis grew out of the cognitive learning theories discussed and to facilitate learning, to develop problem-solving abilities in learners. It has been proved to be a useful tool for describing performance in complex problem-solving domains. The first step in the design of any instruction is a task analysis to determine what should be presented in distance learning materials. Task analysis for instructional design is a process of analyzing and articulating the kind of learning that you expect the learners to know how to perform. Task analysis is very necessary to determine the goals, objectives of learning, to decide the operational components of jobs, skills, learning goals, objectives. So we all need task analysis to do this. So we need to describe what task performers will do, how they will perform a task, apply a skill, how they will think before, during, and after the learning is completed. So we should be able to identify what type of knowledge states, like is it declarative knowledge, structural knowledge, procedural knowledge. So we should be able to characterize a job also, a task also. So which task, skills, goals needs to be presented, how to select the learning outcomes, how to go about the appropriate instructional development, and how to know which tasks are most important, have priority for a commitment of training resource. Know the sequence in which tasks are performed, select and design instructional activities, strategies, techniques, select appropriate media and learning environments, construct performance assessments and evaluation. Now the task analysis is the most critical step in instructional planning. Based on the types of knowledge stated, the task analysis helps to resolve the problems of a teacher, such as it defines the content, skills, and procedures related to student performance or marginalizes them. It is a crucial step which helps in planning and knowing what is yet not completely known. Then it also helps in reflection processes. It also compels the instructional designer to work at each individual step, skills, procedures that underline the contents which have to be highlighted. During this planning, the teacher or the instructional designer would be able to visualize contents from the learner's perspective. Now, so using this knowledge can not only gain subject and students' prior knowledge inside, but also plan for appropriate instructional teaching and assessing strategies. So there are some techniques for task analysis which involve topic analysis. Here we have to identify different structures, facts, concepts, principles, interpersonal skills. Then we have to group the related content structures from different subjects and their implied competencies. arranged the various components into logical and sequential order, prepared the final outline of the topic to represent your task analysis. Then we have to perform the procedural analysis, which would help in conducting the task better. So what does the learner perform? To identify the action in which the learner must perform. These actions are either psychomotor in nature or mental, or it involves cognition in nature. So what does the learner need to know to do about these steps? What knowledge or information is necessary? What does the learner need to know about the resources for further doing the work on it, the referrals or the references? So how does the learner demonstrate using information in conducting an action? It could be meta-procedural, metacognitive knowledge skills, and what physical and mental activities did one undertake? So what stimulus, material or background information or local knowledge resources were used in developing these steps, whether it was related to material, equipment, hands-on activity, or local or situational experiences. Then next step would be how best can these aspects of planning be represented in the final draft of planning. So what representational strategies would be possible, whether we would be able to have concept maps, audiovisual schema. So these are things that would come up with this better. Now this cognitivist school of thought discusses how best the representational strategies have to be organized for inclusion in further assessment planning. It could be setting up the standards, integrating objectives, tables, specifications, blueprints, etc. Cognitive approach also is used for learner analysis. The key to instructional design is to work around the distance learners rather than the contents learning. It is very important to analyze the learner groups before the instruction is planned. So the learner styles are the key in developing effective self-learning materials, and the teacher and the instructional designer must be able to identify the target learners. Prior to this, one should also have an understanding of learner characteristics in order to analyze the learners before learning experiences are planned for them. So we can say that the implication is reminding the designer that the learners at different stages of cognitive development do not think and process information in the same manner. Learning materials and activities need to be designed and appropriately to fit developmental needs of individual learners. And the second implication is that unless the presented information is stored in the long-term memory, it will quickly be forgotten. Meaningful learning, which occurs when new information can be related to existing knowledge, is more resilient to be forgotten rather than just rote memorization. With this, we come to an end of this video session. In this session, we learnt about Bruner's theory of instruction, David Ausubel's theory of learning, and applications of cognitive theories on instructional design. Now I, Dr. Amiteshwar Ratra, Associate Professor at Stride, IGNOU, says you bye, and we will meet you again in another session. Namaskar.